So let's take a look at what we need to cut for our daily drift. Straps. We need to cut an exterior strap piece which is 155 centimeters or 61 inches long, and a corresponding interfacing piece. You may have to join your fabric like I have here, and if you're not sure how to join it, and we do it this way so that we have not all the bulk in the one spot. If you're not sure how to do that, I will leave a link to a blog tutorial below so you can have a look. But we need one of those and the interfacing, and I've already fused that. We need an underside of the strap. Now you can use exterior or your lining fabric. Since I'm using two different exterior fabrics for my bag, I have a feature fabric on the front. I'm going to use that fabric for the underside or lining side of my strap. So I've cut one of those. Now this one is slightly shorter than the other one. It's cut at 148.5 centimeters or 58.5 inches long. And I'll explain that when we go through making the strap. That's just so we don't have bulky ends. And we need to cut two strap tabs, two exterior, two interfacing, and I've fused those. And now if you're using cork or vinyl, I would suggest you leave off the interfacing, especially if you're using a domestic machine, because it gets very thick otherwise and hard to sew. And we need two strap tab stabilizers, just two Decaville light, like that. That'll give your strap strength even if you don't have the interfacing. Back body A, we need to cut one exterior, one interfacing, and you need to pay attention to how to place this on your fabric when you're cutting so that you get the pieces orientated the right way. You place the pattern piece right side up on the right side of your fabric like that. And for the interfacing, you place it right side up on the glue side of your interfacing so that when they're cut, then they will fuse together correctly. Otherwise you'll have them back to front like that, and that's no good. So yeah, pay attention to what it says on the pattern for the asymmetrical pieces. And you will also need to mark this center mark. I mark it later during construction, because you can't get that mark by folding, so you'll need to mark that according to your pattern. And you'll need one stabilizer piece and cut that on the glue side of the fleece so that when you glue it, when you stick it, it is also the right way. So just center it into the middle and fuse. Back body B, we need one exterior, one interfacing, face up on the right side of the fabric, glue side of the interfacing, and one fleece. Place the pattern piece face up on the glue side of the fleece, and then center and fuse. And for your front body, one exterior, one interfacing, and one body stabilizer fleece. This is just your placement marks. You do not cut any of that out. And body stabilizer, we need to cut that out of our fleece, and I've fused everything in place here. And once you've cut that out, it'll reduce the bulk when you're sewing your zipper pocket. And make sure you're cutting this fleece on the glue side. Pattern piece is face up on the glue side of the fleece, so that when it's stuck in the right spot. There's the marks here on the side of the body. We'll mark them as we go, but you can't get those two marks by folding, so you'll need to mark that from the pattern piece. But the center marks, you can use the pattern piece or fold for the top and the bottom. So we'll put that aside. Your exterior upper gusset, two exterior pieces and two interfacing, and we need two upper gusset stabilizer pieces, which are fleece. And as you can see, I've centered and fused the fleece onto the interfacing on the back of my fabric. So they're not asymmetrical, so you don't have to worry about the orientation of these. Put that there. Lining upper gusset, two lining and two interfacing, and I've already fused those. The exterior lower gusset, one exterior, one interfacing, which I fused. And then you also need to cut one lower gusset stabilizer piece, which I have fused there. You just center it and fuse it. And we have a base stabilizer from Decaville Heavy, which you can just find the center by folding your pattern piece, mark the center marks, and use either your stabilizer pattern piece or your other one, and just to find the center you can use the center mark from the pattern piece just to mark the exterior lower gussets, so that you can match up your marks and fuse into place. Once you fuse that, allow it to cool for at least half an hour. That way it'll stick properly and won't come off later on. You need to cut one exterior zipper pocket facing from lining and from interfacing and fuse. You can cut the window out of your paper pattern, but do not cut it out of the fabric, and I'll show you what to do with that later. Exterior zipper pocket front, one lining, one interfacing. Again, really pay attention to how you're cutting this. You need to make sure you're cutting it with the face up on the right side of the fabric to get your pocket orientated, because the front and back are different sizes. And if you're using cork or vinyl and you don't have any fleece on those, you may wish to pad your pocket with a little fleece. I have fleece on my body exterior pieces, so I don't add it into the pocket because I don't need that much padding. But that's up to you whether you want to add that padding, but if you do, there's the pattern piece. For the back, I do add a fleece, which I have fused into place there. So you need to cut one lining, one interfacing and one fleece, just to give that a little bit of padding so it doesn't poke into your lining, whatever you've got in there, some sharp keys or whatever. So make sure you're paying attention to the orientation again when you cut those. Exterior slip pocket back, one lining, one interfacing. This is the piece that you add your fleece to, and center and fuse like that. And for the exterior slip pocket front, this one is the one where you can choose to add fleece or not. If you have fleece on your exterior body panels, then I wouldn't add it to the pocket. Interior zipper pocket facing, cut one lining, one interfacing. I fused those. Only cut the window from your paper pattern. Interior zipper pocket, cut two lining and two interfacing, which I've fused. Body lining, two interfacing, two lining and fused. And those center marks, you'll need to use your pattern piece to mark those. And we need to cut a lining lower gusset, one interfacing and one lining, and I fused those. And there we have it. So for your hardware, let's take a look at what you'll need. For your strap, you're going to need a slider. It's 1 inch or 25 millimeters wide, and you'll need two rectangular rings at the same size, 1 inch or 25 millimeters. Bag feet, 4 of and 4 washers. Now that's optional, you don't have to add bag feet if you don't want to. Double cap rivets, they're also optional, whether you want to add rivets or not. Some people like them, some people don't. That's up to you. You can stitch your strap on if you wish. You need 5 of those, and the actual stem length will depend on what materials you're making your bag out of. For your zippers, you'll need to get number 5 zippers, and for the exterior top closure we need 42 centimeters or 16.5 inches and 2 pulls. For your exterior zipper pocket, you'll need to cut 19 centimeters or 7.5 inches and 1 pull. And for your interior zipper pocket, we need to cut 21 centimeters or 8.25 inches and 1 pull. If you wish to add a label, you'll need one of those and a bit of scrap Decaville or something to put behind it, just to give it a bit of strength and support. And that's all we need in terms of hardware. Double-sided tape, need a bit of that, just will help with adding zippers and so on. I'm using this really narrow little 3mm one. It's very sticky, but because it's very sticky and very narrow, I can keep it out of my seam allowances. because I don't like to stitch through double-sided tape unless it is the wash away type. But this little skinny one holds better than the wash away tape, so it's the best of both worlds. And this one comes from Dreamy Bag Hardware right here in Oz. And other than that, you'll need your usual requirements, such as a stitch ripper, selection of clips, and I suggest some Fabri-Tac or other fast drying fabric glue. That will come in handy as well. So now for our strap tabs. Retrieve your strap tabs, and if you haven't fused your Decaville stabilizer, now would be a good time to do it. We need to grab our double-sided tape and just run that along the top and bottom edges, or each long side. That's another way of putting it. To peel off the tape and fold each long edge in and press to meet in the middle, like so. And you may wish to press this with an iron as well if you're using fabric, just to get a nice crisp edge. Like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch each of these long edges, and that's a little bit too far. Yeah, that's a bit better, a bit more even. So we're going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch each of those long edges. Okay, so let's stitch our strap tabs. I'm using a stitch length of 3.1, stitching 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Now just repeat for your second strap tab. Okay, so now that we have stitched our strap tabs, retrieve our rectangular rings, and I'm just going to put this through there over the join. Doesn't really matter because it does, the strap will cover the other side if you put the join on the other side, but that's just what I've done here. Clip the two raw ends together. Do the same with this one. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch as close as we can to the rectangular ring, and 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch from the strap ends here, just to base those ends together. And I'm going to do that now. Okay, so now that we have done that, clip them together, I'm going to stitch this end here, 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch from the raw ends. I'm just starting towards the middle because I find the strap tab layers shift less when I do this. And on this side I'm going to stitch as close as I can to the hardware, starting towards the center, like that. Now repeat for the second strap tab. So now we're going to work on our straps. If you're using fabric, what we need to do is go over to the ironing board, lightly press your strap in half like that, and then fold the raw edges in to meet in the middle and press. Do that for both pieces. Now if you're making a vinyl strap, draw a line down the center of your strap, add some double-sided tape to each outer edge, fold in and to meet in the middle, and press to stick and hold. Okay, so now that we have our strap pieces pressed, what we need to do is just open up these ends, and we're going to put them together, right sides together, and clip or pin. Like that, and make sure you've got the right sides together and find the other end, because you don't want to twist in the strap. And we shall do the same. Open them out and put them right sides together. Add some pins and clips. Like that. So we've got both ends clipped together. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and just stitch these across each end. Okay, so now we're just going to stitch this short end 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch from the edge, and I'm using a stitch length of 2.4. Like that. And repeat for the other side. So now I have one great big loop. We have one loop, and what we need to do is press these seams. Both of them need to be pressed open. You can do that at the ironing board, but what I like to do, especially with vinyl, is I put a bit of double-sided tape on either side just to hold. You don't have to do this with fabric if you just want to press it open with the iron, but I'm just going to use some tape this time. We're just going to refold that. Give it a bit of a press. You can go over to the iron if you want to. So now what we need to do is we're just going to fold this at this point here. Fold that, well, you can use your seam as a guide like that, and then we're just going to put those two wrong sides together. And now you can either, especially if you're using vinyl, just run some double-sided tape down there so it doesn't shift, or you can just clip in place. I'm just going to use some clips, keeping those edges even. That'll give us a nice end that's not bulky. And we need to do that all the way along to the other side, where we're also going to refold that and bend or turn a little bit of the exterior to the underside. And we're going to just clip all the way along. Like that. Once you have all your straps pinned together, strapped together, clipped together, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch all the way around our strap, 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the edge. Okay, so now we're going to stitch all the way around our strap using a 3mm 1/8 of an inch seam. And a stitch length of 3.1. Okay, so now that we have stitched our strap, we just need to grab one end of the strap and your slider, and we're going to place this with the lining or underside up under the strap, and the slider's wrong side up and through and out the other side, and take that through about 4 centimeters or 1.5 inches past the slider. Pop a clip on there to hold. Now you can either rivet this or stitch it on. We'll stitch a rectangular box, but I'm just going to add a rivet on there. So I'm just going to punch a hole. Actually, I'll just mark that spot with a pen. Like that, so I know where to punch. Like that, and then grab a rivet, pop that through, add on there. And if you're not sure about rivet length, the knobbly bit needs to just poke out at the end there when you press the layers around with your fingers. And if there's more than the knobbly bit sticking out, then your post is too long and likely will bend. And if it's too short, it's more likely to pop open. Once you've done that, then we just need to set our rivet. Like that. Now we can just set this aside for later. So retrieving all the pieces, we have our exterior zipper pocket facing, our exterior zipper pocket front, our exterior zipper pocket back, that's the one I've applied the fleece to, and our front body. So I'll just put those aside. And for the front body, I've installed a label. If you want to install a label, now's a good time to do it. And I've just put some interfacing scraps on the back just to protect that. So now what we need to do is flip that over to the wrong side. We're going to draw those lines on. I'm just going to clip that there, grabbing a marker and a ruler. I'm just going to draw these lines. Like that. Come out real good. I'll just go over that like that. Now I'm just going to measure 1/2 inch back from the end. And draw a line down the centre. Doesn't matter if it's smack in the centre or not. This is just going to be a guide for where we're going to cut later on. Like that. Now what we're going to do is grab that pattern piece back again, and I'm just going to cut this zipper window out of there. This is just to help me mark or place that in the right spot. Just makes it easy. You may have a different way that you like to do this, but this is how I like to do it. In my other sewing room I have a blunt rotary cutter which I use for paper, and then I just use the rotary cutter to cut this out. It's much quicker and easier. But I don't have that here, so cut that out with the scissors. And I'm just going to line that up on the body. Just going to stick a couple of clips in to hold it in the right spot. And then I'm going to grab my zipper pocket piece, my facing, and I'm going to put that on top of there and pin it in place. I'm just going to pop a couple of pins on that centre line, or close to that centre line, and I'm just going to turn over and make sure that it's roughly in the centre there, so I know I've got it in the right spot, like that. So now that we have pinned that in place, we're just going to unclip this and just carefully remove our pattern piece like that. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch those two outer lines from point to point. So now we're just going to stitch our outer lines, starting with our needle down in that point and stitching along the line, and I have a stitch length of 2.4. I'm just going to back stitch at each end. And do the other side. My lines are fading away, I can hardly see them. Like so. So now that we have stitched our outer lines, we just need to grab our stitch rip and make a bit of a hole there so that we can cut. I'm just going to cut down the center to our point there in the middle and then snip out to each corner. Now make sure here that you don't cut your thread. Cut as close to your thread as you can, but without cutting the thread. Now if you do nip your stitches, you can go back over and just reinforce that area. And it happens every now and again. Like that. I always just double check to make sure I haven't nicked my stitches. So what we need to do now is we're going to go over to the iron and press the fabric like that, and on the other side press it like this. So now that I have pressed my fabric away from the body so that they're facing in towards the center of our window, I'm going to grab a marker and I'm just going to eyeball this. It doesn't have to be accurate. Approximately 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch back from each point. This is where I'm going to begin and end my top stitching, like that. So now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to top stitch right there along that facing close to the edge of the seam, and on this side same thing, right close to the edge of the facing there so that it's attached to that middle section. Okay, so now I'm just going to top stitch this. Normally I'd use a white on here, but I'm just going to leave it as red so that you can see it better. I'm just going to do a stitch length of 3.1 and repeating on the other side, just making sure that this is out of the way. Like so. So now that I've done that, we're just going to poke that through to the other side, and we're going to press. We'll start by finger pressing, and now I'm going to take that over to the ironing board and give it a thorough press from both sides, and that stitching line will just help make that roll to the other side so you don't see the facing. And you can just give it a bit of a pull and a press like that. So now that I have given that a good press like that, and since it still sticks up and I want it to make sure it just stays nice and flat so I don't get any roll towards the front, I'm going to add some glue. You can use some double-sided tape if you think it's going to hold well enough, but if you're using vinyl or cork, you will most likely need to use a glue. So I'm just going to put, I'm not going to go past these ends bit because you're going to need to be able to access that for stitching your pocket closed. So I'm just going to stick some glue along here, just between where this thing ends and begins, the window on both sides. This is just any fast drying fabric glue, but if you have a nice strong double-sided tape, that may do the job for you. I'm just going to push that down, just making sure that that's nicely rolled to this back so we don't have any of our facing showing at the front. And I'm just going to put a weight on that for a few minutes just to make sure it stays put like that. Just give that 2 minutes to dry. So retrieving your exterior zipper pocket front and your exterior zipper, that is the 19 centimeter 7.5 inch zipper, and we're going to grab the double-sided tape and we're going to run that along the opening edge, and we have that written on the pattern piece, so make sure you know which edge is your opening edge. Like that. Now we're just going to peel that tape backing off, grabbing our zipper, and I did stitch 6mm 1/4 inch from each end just to secure those ends so I didn't accidentally pull the zipper head off at some stage. But now we're just going to place that right side up on the right side of the fabric like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam. Swapping to my zipper foot, going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam and a stitch length of 2.4. Like that. So now we're going to go over to the ironing board and we're going to press the fabric away from the zipper like that. So now that we have pressed our pocket, stitched our zipper on, pressed our pocket, we need to grab our exterior zipper pocket back and we're going to run some double-sided tape along the opening end. And pull that backing off. Now grabbing your pocket, we're going to place it right sides together on top of that with your zipper tape onto the double-sided tape and press to stick it down just like that. So we've got those right sides together. So now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch that seam 6mm 1/4 inch from the edge. Stitching 6mm 1/4 inch from the edge, stitch length 2.4. Like so. Now we're going to go over to the ironing board and press that fabric away from the zipper. So now that we have stitched that, press the fabric away, we need to retrieve our body with our facing attached, and we're going to run some double-sided tape along the top and bottom of that window. Like that. Now place this with your fleece on that side. Well, that's the back zipper pocket back piece on that side. This is the front piece, and you have to have your opening zipper up this end and peel this backing off. And now we're going to place that down onto the zipper and we're going to align those edges of the facing with the top and bottom of the zipper like that, and position that in place. Move it around if you need to. When you're happy with that placement, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch around that pocket window, but I'm just going to add a clip down here on the bottom to hold that fabric from the pocket in the right place like that. And now I'm just going to add one here at the top as well, just to make sure it stays, and we'll go and stitch. And I'm going to stitch around my pocket window, not my zipper pull head. I need to make sure that's out of the way, like that. And now you can choose here whether you want to back tack, or whether you want to pull your threads to the back and knock them off. I'm just going to back tack because I'm lazy. I'm going to use a stitch length of 3.1, and I'm stitching about 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from the edge of that window. Stitching across. Just going to back stitch across there for a bit of extra strength. Up with your previous stitching. So now that we've stitched that, just remove these clips, flip that over, flip that pocket piece down, and I'm just going to pin those edges together, just the pocket pieces. And I'm going to grab a scissors and I'm just going to snip this excess pocket away, facing rather, snip, cut away the excess facing. Doesn't have to be neat because nobody's going to see it. And that's just one of my dogs rattling around there. And it doesn't matter if you put too much glue there and you can't trim any away, you don't have to trim any at all. So now that we've done that, we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to flip it up this direction. I'm going to stitch across these little triangle bits that are sticking out here on either end before we go and stitch our pocket. So now I'm just going to stitch across these little corner bits at each end just to reinforce those and strengthen the end of the zipper. I'm going to do that on both ends. Just make sure you don't stitch into your exterior body fabric. Now we're going to stitch our pocket. I'll just trim some of this away so we can see. 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and it's a bit of a tight squeeze there. And stitch length of 2.4. Hold that body back out of the way. Stitching up to those little V's, pretty close to them. And there we have it, one stitched pocket. So now that we have stitched our pocket closed, we just need to trim these lumps off here so it's back level with the seam. A bit of that zipper tape there, like that, and same on this bottom end. Get a bit of this bulk away. Just want that out of that seam, like that. And we'll put that one aside for later. Okay, so now we're going to work on our exterior slip pocket. So retrieve your back body B and the exterior slip pocket front piece. That's this one here. Put that one and that one aside for now. This is the one without the fleece if you have fleece on your body, but it's the front piece. So we need to remove these pattern pieces. I'll just pay attention to the exterior slip pocket opening end. Okay, so now what we're going to do is grab a marker and fold this in half and make a mark like that. And on the opening end, which is that end there, we need to fold that in half and find the center like that. And I don't know that this is going to show this very well on this front, but I'll just try like that. And now we're just going to place that right sides together there at the marks and pin or clip like so. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. And that's my dog snoring in the background, by the way. Okay, so now we're going to stitch this seam using a stitch length of 2.4 and the seam width is 6mm 1/4 of an inch. Like so. And now we're going to go over to the iron and we're just going to press that pocket away from the body piece. So now that we have stitched that and pressed that away, just set that over there for a minute. And we need to retrieve our back body A piece. And we're just going to mark this center mark because you can't find that point by folding, it's not accurate. Grab my marker like that. And on the opening end, we're just going to fold that in half to find the center, like that. Placing those right sides together at those marks and pin or clip. I think my pins have got glue on them, they don't go in very easy. So there we have that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. So now we're stitching using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch seam. I'm stitching with this pocket uppermost so that we can see where to start our stitching. Okay, so now that I have pressed my pocket away from my back body A, now we're just going to flip this over and line up these points, these edges. I'm going to pop a pin in here to hold, or use a clip if you're using vinyl or something. Now grabbing a marker, just going to measure 1 centimetre back from the end of the stitching, or from the edge of the pocket there, and put a mark, and same on this end. Now what we're going to do is we're going to stitch from here to the mark, and from this corner to the mark, and 1 centimetre seam allowance. I'll go and do that now. Actually, I'm just going to pop a couple of clips on there, hold that pocket where it's supposed to be. Like that. Now I'm going to stitch this seam, 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch, stitch length of 2.4. Just make sure you back tack at each end just to secure the seam up to your mark. Move over to the second mark. Like that. We have left that open. Just removing those clips that I put there before. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the iron, or if you're using vinyl you would finger press this, and if I'm using vinyl I like to glue these seams open so that they stay open. But I'm not using vinyl, so I'm just going to go and press them, give them a good press with my iron. Not give it a good press from both sides. So now that I have pressed my seam apart, I'm just going to flip that over, and I'm just going to grab a couple of clips and add them on there to hold that pocket piece up. And I'm just going to do the same on this bottom end here to hold that there. And I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine now, and I'm going to stitch 3mm 1/8 of an inch from the back body B piece from the seam hole there on this side. Do not stitch that side yet. So now I'm going to stitch 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch from the seam on the back body B side. Do not stitch on this side. And I'm using a stitch length of 3.1. Like so. So now that we have stitched this seam, I'm just going to remove these clips, flip it over and press this back down like so. And I'm just going to grab a couple of pins and pin these pocket pieces together. If they don't line up exactly, do not worry about it. Like that. Now what we're going to do is flip this back over, and we're going to go over to the sewing machine and top stitch the top side, now the back body A side of that seam. Okay, so now we're going to stitch 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch from the edge on this back body A side. Your pocket pieces are all laying downwards. We're going to catch the top pocket piece in there, that's fine, but we will still be able to open our pocket, see? Stitch length of 3.1. Like that. So now that we have done that, we need to flip this over. We're going to flip, well actually we're going to flip it this way. We're going to flip that up, and we're going to fold on that seam like that. We're just going to add a couple of clips there to hold that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch our pocket closed. We're going to start here, go down, round and back up to here, and we're going to just stitch as close as we can to that body assembly without actually stitching into the fabric of that body assembly. So now, using a seam allowance of 1 centimeter 3/8 of an inch, I'm just going to remove this back here and line that up. I'm just going to make sure I'm stitching a bit further away so I'm not catching my body fabric, and I'm stitch length of 2.4, and there we go. One stitch too far. It doesn't matter. So now we've done that, we'll just take these clips away, and I'm just going to grab my scissors and trim this corner back this way. And now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch each side of that for about 2 inches 5 centimeters, just to reinforce that corner there. So now I'm just going to go back about 2 inches. It's not important exactly how far, about 5 centimeters, and I'm just going to reinforce this corner just because we've trimmed so close to it. So now I'm just going to mark about 3 millimeters 1/8 of an inch just back from the opening of that pocket. Just going to put a line between the 2 stitches. Obviously use something that comes off, not stains your fabric. And I'm just going to add reinforcement stitches there. If you want to add a rivet, you can do that instead. Just make sure you're not punching through your stitches. Now I'm just going to do a few stitches between the 2 rows of top stitching. Just going to leave that at 3.1. Whoops! I went too far, so I'll just knock it off there so I can unpick that 1 stitch. Now, that's what happens when I'm daydreaming about something else. Lining up on that line, which I can't see because of the reflections. Just do a few stitches, And there we have that. Okay, so now we've done that, and I stitched. I didn't want to put rivets there because I just want that pocket to be inconspicuous, but you can do whatever you want. Now set that aside. And we're going to grab our exterior lower gusset with all our stabilizers attached. And this is if you're going to add bag feet. If you don't want to add bag feet, you can skip this bit. Grabbing a ruler and a pen of some description. It can be any pen because this will be hidden. So we're going to measure 1 1/4 inch in from the long raw edge of the fabric, or 3.2 centimeters. Doesn't matter which one. 1 1/4. 1 1/4. Actually, a pen would be better for this because it's not so runny on that thing, and it doesn't matter because it doesn't never be seen, so it doesn't have to fade. And just draw a line there. Measure 1 1/4 on the other side. Like that. Now the same from the short ends. We need to measure in 1 1/4 inch or 3.2 centimeters from each short end. Now that point where they intersect is where we're going to add our bag feet. So I'm just going to punch a hole there. Punch a hole at the intersection on the side, like that. Now I do like to pop a little bit of fray stopper on those points where the fabric is. If you're using something that doesn't fray, it's not a problem, but for fabric I like to use my fray stopper. Grabbing your feet. Just as hard to open as it can be to start a piece of double-sided tape. Some people like to glue these on to make sure that they stay put. If you have a bit of Gutermann glue or something, feel free to add it. E6000 glue. Like that. Now you can use duct tape on this, but my duct tape was very sticky. I tried to put it in a different bag and then my foot wouldn't glide over it, so it caused me problems when I was sewing my gusset seams. So I'm not going to add that duct tape. I'm going to add some scraps of interfacing instead, just to give it a bit of extra protection. And I'm just going to go and fuse that. Okay, so now I've fused that. Just set that aside. And we're going to grab our exterior upper gusset pieces and our lining upper gusset pieces and our top zipper. So now we're going to apply some double-sided tape along the edge of one of our exterior gussets. Well, you can do them both at this point if you want, but we're just going to be working with one and then working with the other side. So, but since I've got the tape in my hand, I may as well just add it to both now. I'm just going to set that one over there though, and press that so it sticks down, and then we're going to pull the backing off. Grabbing our zipper, we're going to place it face down and centre it left to right, so there's about 1/2 inch hanging over each end, and just press that down onto the gusset. Now grabbing the tape again, we're going to run another line all the way along the length or width of that gusset, whichever way you want to call it, length, width, like that. Peel the backing off, grab one of the lining pieces, and we're going to place that right side down at the wider end is going to go onto our zipper tape. The narrow end stays down there. So we're just going to line that up so it's equal with your exterior gusset. And press into place. Smooth it out like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam. So now I'm going to stitch my gusset seam 6mm 1/4 inch from the edge, stitch length of 2.4. Depending on the size of your zipper foot, you may need to stop, lift your foot up, move your zipper pulls out of the way, put your foot back down and continue. Okay, so now that we have stitched that, I'm just going to go over to the iron and give that a good press so it's pressed away from our zipper. And my dog keeps snoring. Okay, so now that I have pressed my gussets away from my zipper tape, I'm just going to add a few clips to make that hold there. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to top stitch 3mm 1/8 inch from the edge of our gusset. So now I'm just going to top stitch using a top stitch length of 3.1 and 3mm 1/8 inch from the edge of this seam here. Okay, so now that we've done that, we're going to repeat for the other side. Just going to peel that double-sided tape off that I put there earlier. Now we're just going to place this right side down onto our gusset and just line up the other ones so that we get them even. Like that. Make sure your pull is down out of the way. Checking the other end. And he's into it. You may want to move your pulls just to make sure you can get that nice and straight. Sometimes it bends out of the way where the pull is. Like that. Give it a good press so it stays. Grab your double-sided tape. Run that along the top edge of the zipper. Grab the lining gusset. Give it a good press to make sure it sticks. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine. That's what it looks like. Going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch using a 6mm 1/4 inch seam. Stitching using a 2.4 stitch length and a seam allowance of 1/4 inch 6mm. Like that. So after stitching that 1/4 inch 6mm seam, I went over to the ironing board and pressed, and now I'm just going to put a few clips in here to hold, and I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine again and stitch using a 3mm 1/8 inch seam, top stitch. So now we need to just remove our clips. Now retrieve your strap tabs, and we're just going to place this, if there's a better side, put it right side, better side down, and we're just going to put it so that 1 centimetre 3/8 inch is overhanging the edge here, so a little bit more than your 6mm 1/4 inch stitching. Clip that on there, same on this side. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch to fasten it to our tape. We're going to stitch 6mm 1/4 inch in from the edge of the tab to fasten it to our tape. I'm just going to move that a little bit. Not quite where I want it to be. Before I forget to mention it, if you haven't added your pulls, do that now before you put your tabs on, because once you stitch them on, your pulls won't be, you need to have them on now. So now we're just going to baste this tab in place over the zipper tape on top of the previous 6mm 1/4 inch seam. I'm just going to baste it to that tape so it doesn't move. Now that we have basted those tabs on there, flip it over and we're just going to gather up this center lining. I'm just going to clip it into the center of the gusset assembly. Like that. Retrieve your exterior gusset. Now we're going to clip each end together. And this side, the lower gusset is longer, so I'm going to make a bit of a loop there. Like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch from here up to this lining seam here, and then from the lining seam to the end. If you can't get all the way to the lining seam because you've got a bulkier fabric than me, that's fine, just stitch as far as you can. And same on this side, and sometimes it's easier if you flip that over and do the second side from the other side. Okay, so now I'm going to stitch these gusset ends. I'm going to use a stitch length of 2.4 and a seam allowance of 1 centimetre 3/8 inch. Stitching as close to that lining seam as I can without stitching into it. Now to do the other side, sometimes it's easier to flip this over and the lining seam is coming up where the zipper tape is there, so you can see where your zipper tape is. We'll just go to that point. Again, if you're using bulky materials, you may not be able to stitch as far as I have. That doesn't matter. Just do as far as you can. And repeat for the other side. Like that. Grab your lining lower gusset and we're going to grab this and we're going to take these clips off, and you may want to give that a bit of a press with an iron perhaps. I'm not going to, I'm just going to continue with this, and we're just going to line these ends up and pin. You can clip if you prefer. Now if you find that it's pulling, and then you can trim to fit, or even if you just take up that slack so that we don't have any pull there. Like that, so they're pinned like that, and do the same on the other end. We're only pinning the lining. So we have that. Now we shall go over to the sewing machine. Okay, so now we're going to stitch our lining gussets. We need to fold our exterior so that it's out of the way, and we're stitching with a stitch length of 2.4, 1 centimetre seam allowance. Just make sure that that exterior gusset is out of the way. And we'll stitch up here as close as you can get to your zipper there, but don't panic if you can't get real close due to your bulk. And now we're going to do the other side. Like that. We have those two lining seams stitched, and we need to repeat that for the other side. Like that. Okay, so now that we have stitched those lining gussets, we need to turn this so that this lining lower gusset is out of the way down there, and this is here. And all we're going to do is we're going to line up these seams here with the exterior. Just pull that so that that's laying with the exterior, and clip or pin. I am going to add a clip on the side here, and same on this side. It's fine if I clip on the side, it tends to hold it pretty good, like that. And same on the other end. Keep that body base lower gusset's exterior out of the way, and like that, like so, like that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine, and we're just going to stitch this opening closed just between the two top stitching there, just in there. The more space you leave here that's not stitched, the better, because it makes it easier to work with later on. But if you find you have too big a hole here because you couldn't stitch up to this earlier, you can always ladder stitch that shut if you need to. Okay, so now we're going to stitch this. Just make sure your exterior and everything is out of the way, so that when we stitch we're not catching something in there that we're not supposed to. And here I've got a bit of red thread. I'm going to snip that off. So I'm just going to go between those two top stitching things, 3mm, 1/8 of an inch from the fold, or you could go even a bit more than that if you wanted to. Top stitch length of 3.1. Do the other end. Again, making sure that exterior is out of the way, and I'm flipping that all so that I'm getting that nice and pulled back there. And that's within that seam there. Okay, so now that we have stitched these two little end bits here, we need to take these clips off like that. And what we need to do now is we need to turn this and pull all our linings to one side so that we can access these ends here. Now, so what we need to do is we need to what we're going to do is we're going to stitch this seam here, 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch from that edge. And what we're going to do as we work is we're just going to pull this lining back, stitch, and then stitch across to there, and then make sure you're pulling that lining back out of the road and stitch the rest of the gusset seam. Just making sure you're keeping all that lining over to that side. Okay, so now with your linings pulled to one side, and we're going to make sure that this lining is kept out of our seam. So pull that back right out of the way, and we're stitching on the lower gusset side, and we're stitching a seam of 3 millimeters, 1/8 of an inch, and a stitch length of 3.1. Just looking under there, making sure my lining is pulled back. Make sure again that that's out of the way. Push it back towards the other direction and pull this one back. Let's have a good look. All good. Like this, and make sure the only thing that you might have caught is a bit of seam allowance of the lining gussets. You don't want to catch this part in the stitching anywhere. So long as you haven't caught below this seam allowance, you're all good. Just needs to be like that bit free. So repeat for the other side. Just underneath, I'm just pulling that first bit, I'm just pulling that back like that, stitching up to the middle bit, then I'm make sure I'm pushing that one back further out of the way, and I'm bending this one back out of the way to stitch the rest. I hope that makes sense. Okay, so now this is what we have so far. We have the lining free. You haven't caught any of this lining in your stitching there. You've pulled that back out of the way so you could stitch on both sides. Doesn't matter if you catch the seam, you just don't want to catch this stuff here, because we need to work with this moving forward. But before we get to that, I'm going to put a rivet in my strap tab just down below there. So I'm just going to make sure I pull my lining back out of the way. In fact, I'm just going to put a clip, so I'll make sure I don't poke a hole in my lining. Now you don't have to rivet this, that's entirely up to you, but I'm going to pop in a rivet. So now we have our tabs riveted and our gussets sewn, and that's loose. What we need to do is mark some centres of our top gussets here. Now you can mark this with a pen, or you can do little snips, whichever way works best for you. Just line up those seams and find the centre. Just going to push that lining down out of the way, and I'm just going to do a little tiny snip like that. I'm going to do the same on the other exterior side. Push that lining down out of the way, line up those seams, find the centre, and a little tiny snip like that. Now we need to find the centre of our linings. Like that. Lower gusset. I've still got my marks there, so I'm just going to use that. Like that. Now, all those marks, we need to grab our body exteriors. Now, for these, we need to mark these marks on the side where it says centre mark, because we can't get that from folding, so we're going to need to use our pattern piece. Now, the centre of the top and bottom you can either fold, or since I've got my pattern piece right here, I'm just going to use that. And our join is the centre mark. And I'm going to do it on this one too, but I'm not going to be able to see it on the right side, so I'm flipping it over and marking the wrong side. Like that. So with all our marks done, first of all we need to turn this so that our linings are on the outside. Pulled back, just pull it back out of the way like that, so those linings are back there. You might want to stick a clip in there just to keep that back down out of the way. So this is what we have, a loop with our linings back there, like so. Now, we're going to start with the front body, so in my case it's this one. And remember that the top goes up there, the bottom goes down here, so make sure you've got this orientated the right way. Maybe just open that zipper pocket, make sure it's out of the way. Now what I'm going to do is just pin each of the 4 points, or you can use a clip if you're using vinyl or cork or something. Now this centre mark here that we put here goes with your seam on the body side and around this way, and match that there. Now normally I just go ahead and pin and clip everything, but one of my testers said, oh, they go over to the machine at this point and baste those points to keep them in place, and that is a brilliant idea. So I'm going to go and do that right now. So I'm just going to stitch each of these 4 side points so that they stay put. I'm going to use my normal seam allowance of 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch just to baste this little bit in place. Stitch length of 2.4. Normally I stitch from the gusset side, it's actually easier. I'm going to do that here. Like that. I'm going to do the same over here on this side. Now we're stitching these bits where it's straight and we don't have to worry about the curves at this point. But doing this now will just make it easier to manage. And I'll do the same over on this side. Okay, so now with those 4 points in place, we're going to work on the rest. So now that we have all of these 4 points attached, we can work on each of our gusset piece. Now, it's easier if you snip into the seam allowance on this. Where did my little snips go? And we're snipping into the gusset seam allowance. Just going to do little snips all around the curvy bits. And I just tend to just push this flatten it out like this to make it go, and what I do is put some staples in, or pins. I actually tend to pin this first. If you can't pin if you're using vinyls, but for fabric I'll stick a couple of pins in. Just holds it there while I staple it. Or you could pin in within the seam allowance if you wanted to with vinyl. But I just grab this stapler, and I just find they hold better than clips. And we need to make sure we're stapling in the seam allowance, like that. And I'm going to stick one out here where this curved bit is, like that. I missed. This stapler is sometimes a bit hard to tell where I'm stapling, and I don't want to put it where I'm going to stitch. Trying to keep my head out of this video. And really don't need much of just the odd staple along here. The straight bit doesn't tend to shift much, like so. And then we'll work on this side. Snip in up to about 6 millimeters, 1/4 of an inch, no more. Remember, there always feels like there's too much fabric on the outer edges. That's because of the curves. It's going to be longer out here than it is in here. So it's normal for you to have bunching and extra fabric out there. And that's why we snip into it, just to make it easier to get this done. Like that. So now we've got that all clipped and in place. We're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch, and I do find it easier to stitch when I stitch from the gusset side, so that's what I'm going to do. Okay, so now we're going to stitch this gusset in place, and I'm just going to start off where I left off before, on these centre bits. 1 centimetre, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, stitch length of 2.4. Slipping a little bit there, but I don't think it's going to be a major deal. Yeah, make sure you keep your pocket out of the way. Get off there. Swish this out of the way. It's a little bit sick there. Now, have a look, just turn it and have a look and see that you're happy with your corners. Make sure they look good. I can fix any little wonkiness too when we go around and stitch a second time, but I like to just check my corners right now just to make sure that they're looking reasonably good, because in a few places it might have slipped a little bit, but if I've got a nice neat corner I'm not going to worry about that, and looks pretty good to me. So that's all good. Now let's go back and get rid of these staples. Okay, so now that we have stitched that and I have checked that I'm happy with those corners, I'm going to remove these staples. Oh, what fun! I did have a staple remover somewhere, but I don't know where it is. So I'm going to use these needle nose pliers. So go away and have a cup of coffee. Okay, so now that I have all my staples out, I'm going to grab my pinking shears and I'm going to trim the corners. Do not trim the long straight bit, because we're going to be using that to attach our lining to so it doesn't droop. So just pink around the corners, or you can notch your seams if you don't have pinking shears. Like that. And now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm going to re-stitch my seam just to make it nice and secure and fix any little wonky bits like that. Where I've gone a bit wonky, I'll just smooth that off. Okay, so I'm going to re-stitch my entire seam. And just smooth this off as we go around. And I'm stitching right next to my first seam or over the top of it if I'm correcting something. And if you can't get close enough because of that bag foot there and your foot's too wide, you could try a zipper foot. And there, we've stitched that a second time. So now that we have stitched that second time, done our clipping and whatnot, we need to flip this over so we have access to this second side. Pull that lining back down out of the way. We don't want to be working with that. We don't want it caught in our exterior. I'm going to also open my zippers just to make it a little less stiff and easier to work with. Like that. You can always add a clip here. Just make sure it stays out of the way, and grab your back body piece, and we're going to do the same process to attach this to the other side. Just double checking that I lined up that mark with the seam, not the top stitching. There we go. So I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch a little bit on each of those 4 points just to make sure that they stay put, and I don't have to be worrying about poking myself with those pins either. Okay, so now that we have stitched those 4 points, we need to do some snipping into our gusset here. Where's all the snips? Like that. We have everything stapled in place. That's the interfacings back off the fabric there. Don't worry about that. So now we've got that all in place. I'm going to go over to the sewing machine, and this is open here just to make it easier to maneuver around, and I'm just going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch the seam. Okay, so now I'm just going to stitch my other second side gusset seam. So now I'm just going to go and pull out all my staples. So I've pulled out all my staples, and I'm just going to have a look and make sure that I'm happy with the look of the corners. And I'm happy with my corners. So what I'm going to do now is trim my seams with thinking shears. Now that I've done that, I'm just going to go and stitch my seam again. So now we're going to work on our interior zipper pocket. So we need our interior zipper pocket facing, our interior zipper pocket pieces, our body lining, and our zipper for our interior. That is the 21 centimetre 8 1/4 inch zip. So first thing we're going to do is pop this over to the wrong side and clip that on and draw the lines. Just like that. Now, retrieve one body lining piece. We only need just the one at this point. And our facing. Just going to find the centre. And find the centre of this. And this is going to be 2 centimetres or 3/4 of an inch down from the top, centred in the middle, and pin in place. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch the bottom and the top lines. So we're going to stitch the bottom and top lines. I'm just going to put my needle down into the point. My stitch length is 2.4. The other side. Okay, just remove our pins. Grab a stitch rip, or if you've got a cutting mat underneath, you can use a rotary cutter to cut this, but we just need to cut along the line and out to each point without actually cutting into the stitch. Like that. Just I'm checking that I haven't slipped into my stitches. Now we're going to go over to the iron and press the facing either side towards the centre like so, and then we'll pop our 6mm 1/4 of an inch mark at each end. So now we're going to stitch pretty close to the seam. Doesn't really matter exactly where, but approximately 2mm 1/16 of an inch. And I'm going to use my top stitch length of 3.1. Turn it round, flip that facing out of the way, and stitch the second side. Okay, so now that we have understitched either side there, we need to thread that through to the other side, and we're just going to finger press, and then I will take it over to the iron and give it a proper press. So now that we have done that, pressed from both sides, sit that aside, grab our pocket pieces, we'll grab our double-sided tape, run it across the tops of both of those. You need this one for now. Peel that off. Placing the zipper wrong side down so the right sides of the pulls are towards you. Normally I run some stitches across the ends of these to make sure I don't accidentally pull the pull off, but I haven't done that, so I'll have to remember to make sure I don't pull the pull off. So now we need to stitch 6mm 1/4 of an inch from zipper tape. Stitching 6mm 1/4 of an inch from the edge using a stitch length of 2.4. Now we're going to go over to the iron and just press that fabric away from the zipper. So retrieve your second zipper pocket piece, peel the backing off, and we're placing this right sides together, wrong side of the zipper tape, and matching those side edges of the pocket. Like that. Now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and stitch using a 6mm 1/4 of an inch. Go over to the ironing board and press the fabric away from the zipper. So now we've pressed the fabric away from the zipper, we need to retrieve our body lining again and run some double-sided tape along the bottom and top of the window. Sometimes these tapes drive me nuts. Grab your pocket with the opening side on the left if you want your pocket to open from right to left. No. Put the zipper opening on the left if you want your pocket to open from left to right. And we're just going to center this, matching the facing edge with the ends of the zipper, or matching the pocket like that. Since my zipper is a little tiny bit longer, didn't measure that very accurately. Press that into place, grabbing a couple of pins just to pin the pocket, make sure it stays and doesn't flop down under your stitching. And now we're going to stitch all the way around that window. Stitching all the way around the pocket window now using a stitch length of 3.1, seam width of 3mm 1/8 of an inch. So now that we have stitched around our window, we need to flip it over and we're going to smooth that down. Just going to pop a pin in either side. And I'm going to cut this excess fabric off at the top and bottom. Just make these ones even down here. Now we're going to fold these bottom seam allowances up, and you can either just press or glue, or I'm going to use double-sided tape, whatever way you wish to do it. I usually use the double-sided tape and I press. Doesn't have to be super accurate, so I'm just eyeballing my seam allowance. I like to flip it over and just lift that up so that I can match up these bottoms to make them even, since I'm eyeballing. Like that. Now I'm just going to pop to the iron. I'm going to give that a good press, and then we'll go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch the two sides from the body lining uppermost, stitching across those two little corners there as well, triangles, and then stitching our seam. I just like to go over that a few times. It just gives a bit of extra strength at the end of the zipper where there's stress. And we're going to leave this pocket open down the bottom here, because that's where we're going to stitch our lining closed through the bottom of our zipper pocket. Now I'm just going to stitch across these little triangles just to reinforce that area, and that was my dog snoring. Same on the other side. Open the zipper a bit, that'll get that out of the road. My stitch length back to 2.4. I forgot to do it a minute ago. And we're stitching with a 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam. Like that, and we have left the bottom of our pocket open. So we need to retrieve both our lining pieces and our pattern piece, and we're just going to mark the centre marks using these marks on each side to mark your pattern. And you can either fold your pattern in half or just use the paper pattern to mark the centre, bottom and top. Like so. Do it on both pieces. Now retrieve your body assembly, and with the back pocket, that's the slip pocket, facing you, and this sounds like it's complicated or looks like it's complicated in the instructions, but it's not. You just simply flatten that down into the bag body like that and pull this lining back towards you so that you can see all the outer edges of the lining like so. Now if you haven't marked them center points before, now you better do it because you'll need them. Like that. Now we're starting with the piece that doesn't have the zipper pocket attached. Flip that over and line that up with those center marks and pop in a pin. Do that down the bottom, just pull that lining back towards you so you've got the bottom of the lining. Find the bottom centre mark and add a pin. And the side marks go at the side seam like this. And the same on this side. I'll just make that seam going down the way the same as it was. You can't really press it open because half of it's stitched in there, so place that onto that seam and pop in a pin. Now we're going to be leaving the bottom of this open, so I'm just going to put in a pin at the bottom here where it starts to curve. I'm actually going to put in 2 pins to serve as a reminder for myself so I don't stitch it shut. Do the same over at this side like that. Now I'm going to go over to the sewing machine and I'm just going to stitch a little bit on each of those 3 points just to lock them on, and then we'll come back and work on our curves. But that's what you have so far. And we're working on the back of the lining, as you can see there. Other bits still in stuff down in there. Just going to add some 3 pins there just to hold that 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, and it is easier to work from the gusset side. like that. So that's popped those 3 anchor points there, and this bottom we're going to leave open, but I've just left that peg pinned there just to hold it out of the way, but we'll work on those 4 corners now. Okay, so I'm going to work from the uppermost side. I'm going to use my stapler, and I'm just going to snip into my gusset so that will lay nice and flat and easy around those corners. And we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch all the way around there, but we're leaving this bottom end open, and we'll do that now. Okay, so starting at one side of the opening, bring that round, we're stitching using a stitch length of 2.4 and a seam allowance of 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch. Tack a couple of times just to make sure that's nice and secure, so that will be a high stress point. Now we need to go and pull out all our staples. Okay, so I've pulled out all my stitches. I've pulled out all my staples. I'm just going to trim around the curved area only. I'm not going, if I've also, where it slipped and whatnot, I've checked inside to make sure my corners look good, and they still look fine, they look nice. So I'm not going to be adjusting that, I don't worry about it. If it needs adjusting, then I would just go back and do that now. But I find that good, so I'm just going to prune, clip, trim these corners. Now we're not going to do this straight edge, we need that to fasten that to our body. And now we need to get access to the other side to do that. So we need to just pull that back out there, squish the other side back down in there, like that, and now we can access the other side, like that. We've got our opening down here, and we can access all the way around our lining. So now we're just going to repeat the whole process to attach our zipper pocket piece, except this time we're doing the whole seam, we're not leaving an opening. And just make sure that the opening of your zipper pocket is down at the bottom, the same side as your opening for the lining down here, because you don't want your zipper pocket upside down. And also maybe it's a good idea if we just reach in there and open that pocket right up. Like that. Just make sure we don't end up not being able to do anything there. Okay, so I'm just going to fasten either side of this pin here, the center, just to lock those points in place. Adding a couple extra pins there. Like that. Now we shall go and work on our corner. Okay. So now it's time to work on our corners again. Pick on one. Just repeat the same process as before. So now I have all 4 corners stapled. I can go over to the sewing machine and stitch, and remember this bottom piece is open, And just make sure you keep this pocket out of the way. Put a clip in there. Okay, so we're stitching with the gusset side uppermost, starting off where we left off earlier. 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam, stitch length of 2.4. Like so. Now we just need to remove our staples. Okay, so I've pulled out my staples. I've checked my curves to make sure those corners look nice. I'm happy with those, so now I'm just going to trim these corners off. Like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to fasten our lining to our exterior so that we don't have a droopy lining. So we just need to match the exterior and lining straight seams here. Match the edges. Add some clips to hold. Like that. And now we need to do the same with the other side. So we just need to pull that back out of there. Like that. Shove that lining down in there. And get the top part like so. So it's looking like that. Matching those centre marks. Add some clips to hold. Like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch the straight long edge here, and we're just going to stitch just within the seam allowance next to that previous stitching on both sides, just between the curves, just to attach that so their lining doesn't droop once we turn it right sides out. Okay, so now we're just going to stitch between the curves just within that seam allowance from before, and the same on the other side, like that. Okay, so now that we have done that, we need to turn our bag through the bottom of our zipper pocket. So just reach in there, and I hope you had your wheat fix this morning. A little bit of a fun challenge here. Run your fingers around those curves just to push them all out. Make sure that slip pocket is laying in the right direction. Push that in there, kick that out. Everything a good push out. And now what we're going to do is we're reaching down through our zipper pocket, grabbing the bottom of our lining and pulling that back out so we can access it to close it. Like that. Now we're just going to grab some pins and pin it. You can clip it if you want, but I don't find clips hold this well enough. I like to pin. And now we're going to go over to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch the bottom closed from our previous stitching over to our previous stitching. So this is the second time I'm doing this because I ran out of bobbin thread. I stitched the whole seam closed only to find I hadn't because I was out of thread. So here we go again. Stitching from the previous stitching all the way over to the other previous stitching, 1 centimetre 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, stitch length of 2.4. And there we have it. This time the seam is stitched closed. So now that we have our lining done, just push that back down in there. Nice neat lining. Push out all these seams. I'll do that properly in a minute, but now we need to concentrate on this zipper pocket. We just want to trim these corners off like that. Okay. Line those edges. I'm going to use some pins. I just find that they hold it so that the layers don't shift. And if you find that thick there, you can give it a couple of whacks with a hammer. And then we shall go to the sewing machine and stitch that seam closed. Okay, so I'm going to stitch this seam closed. I'm going to use a stitch length of 3.1. I'm going to stitch pretty close to the edge of the fold. Try and keep those layers aligned. And then inspect your seam to make sure you haven't ran off anywhere, and I haven't, so that's all good. Okay, so now that that has been closed off there, we can shove that back down in there, give it another push out, everything a good push, close that zipper. Just give everything a good manipulate. And I'll show you what I do with that in a minute. But for now, we're going to add this strap. Now decide which side you want that adjustable bit on. I'm going to put it on this side so that the adjustable bit's on this side and that's hanging against my body. And so what we do is we'll grab the end of the strap with the underside, lining side up, and we'll pull that through till we come to our slider, and then we're going to thread that in and out the other side like so. Just pull that through. That's like that. Hope you can see this on the video. Oops, it's twisted. Like that. Now it goes through and around and to the other side, and we'll come back through like so. Bend that over. Pull it through about 4 centimeters, 1.5 inches or so, and you can measure it if you want to be exact, but I'm just eyeballing it. Stick a couple of clips on there to hold. Now you can either stitch a rectangular box with a cross through it to hold it, or add rivets. I'm going to add a couple of rivets. So I'm just going to grab my marking pen and mark my spots where I want my rivets. Like so. Grab my rivets. First I need to poke my holes, punch my holes. Like that. Okay, so now we have a nice finished lining, no binding. Smooth that all out there. It looks pretty. I like it. I like no binding. So now to fix these corners, we want to have that sitting out nice. Now there's two things you can do. You can go and roll these with your fingers and hammer with a hammer, and that will help set that in the right spot. Another way to do it is just add some clips. Just make sure you've rolled it so that it's out, and then just clip all the way around. Now this will depend on your materials you use. Perhaps some may mark. You might want to test it with some scraps first. Sometimes the marks come out after a few days or with a bit of heat. But if you don't want to do the clip thing, do the hammer thing. Roll the seam and then gently whack with a hammer, or in the places like this, give it a good whack. But cover it with some scraps because you don't want to mark whatever materials you've used. And this particular tip comes from one of my testers. I usually just do the hammer thing, but I've tried this now and I find that it does a good job. That. Nice attractive, isn't it? I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to do this one too. This side as well. I'm just also again make sure those pockets are pushed down where they're supposed to. And these thicker parts I would, or I will, still whack with a hammer. Like so. Our porcupine is ready. So now we're just going to leave that to sit. I'm going to leave it go sitting overnight before I take these clips off, just so that I can get a nice edge around my bag. So there, I've taken off my porcupine clips, and now we have a finished bag. I pressed it a bit, and here we have it. We have a nice slip pocket at the back that holds a phone, a smaller phone. At the front we have a zipper pocket, nice roomy zipper pocket. You can stick your keys in there or whatever else it is you might want in there, doggy bags. And inside the bag we have another zipper pocket and this awesome lining that has no binding. And it looks so pretty. I really like that lining. It's no secret that I'm not a fan of binding, and I prefer taking the few extra steps to achieve a nice lining without binding. The steps are not hard. If you follow along with the tutorial, you can see that they're not hard. It's just a little bit of extra steps, but it's worth it to end up with a nice, pretty, binding-free lining. And you could always add a slip pocket on the other side if you need more pockets. Easy peasy. And there we have it, the Daily Drift. I hope you will grab the pattern and come sew along with me.